Hello, it's Anthony Chadwick from the Webinar Vet, welcoming you to another episode of the UK's top veterinary podcast. It's VETchat. And we're very fortunate today to have Robin Smith on the phone. Robin is a product design engineer. Now, you may ask, why have we got a product design engineer on the podcast? And you will find out as we move forward. Robin is the CEO and founder of Numnuts. It probably does exactly what it says on the tin. It's an interesting situation because, of course, remembering my time as a large animal vet and also as a student, you probably remember how lambs were castrated very early using rubber rings, which were painful. They looked uncomfortable. The lamb seemed to take a time to settle down. And I think the work that's come on since then has shown that this is, an uncomfortable way, obviously, to perform that particular procedure. So Robin has been looking at how he can solve that problem, has been having great success with it in Australia. And so I wanted to bring him on because I think it's very interesting from a welfare perspective that this is an area that we should look at. But perhaps before we dive right into the product, Robin, tell us a little bit about your history, because, of course, you've got a famous dad who is a vet as well, haven't you?
That's right. Hello, and hello everyone on the Vet podcast. Yes, so I am a product design engineer. I'm the black sheep of the family. Both my grandfather and father were vets. My grandfather spent his time as a government vet in Kenya back in the 1950s and 60s, looking after large animals and farms on behalf of what was the British government. It was a colony, I guess, back then. My dad grew up in Kenya. He graduated from Glasgow Uni and I think spent about 3 months in practice and realized his bedside manner was not great with the humans in the room, and moved into research at the Morden Research Institute. His life's work then became a parasitologist, and his life's work was looking at the barber's pole worm, the homunculus worm. And he ended up developing a product called Barbavax, which is, I think, the world's first vaccine for any gut-dwelling parasite in any mammal. And Barbavax was developed out of Morden Research. It's a parasite that's largely prevalent in Australia, particularly around the places which has rainy summers. Wet summers on a place called Armadale in New England. They were having huge losses of sheep to Barber's poleworm, which is a nasty parasite. Once it takes hold, sheep become anemic and die very quickly. So, yeah, that was Dad's background, and he launched that in 2014. In order to actually facilitate making that, he needed to call upon his vagabond son, who was this design engineer, and we needed to make some special machines that actually harvest the worms and reprocess them to make the vaccine. So that was my sort of first introduction as an engineer into the sheep world, and what brought me back into the flock, so to speak. And that's really, I guess, the intersection that led to Numnuts.
Yeah, I think it's really great, Robin, because similar to story to myself, if we spend all of our time looking within the veterinary industry and we gaze at our navel, we actually don't grow as a profession. And certainly when I developed Webinar Vet, nobody knew what a webinar was. And the reason I developed it was looking into the future. You don't actually have to go into the future. You just have to step into another industry. So I went to an
Absolutely.
internet conference, heard about webinars and said, why are we not doing this in the veterinary profession? And was able to bring it into the profession. Similarly with your dad, if your dad had tried to do this all on his own and use veterinary expertise, it's the fact that he's gone out and looked for other people that strengthens the team. And I think it's becoming more common now. We're probably less conservative than we were 10, 15 years ago. But I think it is so important that we don't see ourselves as an island. We actually do look out, to other industries and to other professions and learn from them.
That's right. Interdisciplinary thinking, I suppose you'd call it. That's what leads to innovation. Well,
Yeah.
the little story around dad's vaccine is that he got it working in the lab in the early 2000s, and he got a dose that he thought, okay, this would be effective, and but it was very, he spent 10 years trying to synthesize it using synthesis techniques, and he couldn't get anywhere. And thinking that that was the kind of end of the tunnel, he then just did a sort of wild card experiment where he took 1,000th of the dose that was effective and injected it into a sheep. And sure enough, he got an immune response. And they were, wow, we never would have thought such a small dose would have made a difference. And it was that simple sort of eureka experiment that then led him to just do some fag packet numbers and think, well, maybe we could actually produce this commercially in the same way that we did in the lab, which was to harvest worms. Essentially, they inject the barber's pole into lambs that are about to go to slaughter 2 weeks before they go to slaughter. That then they actually grow worms. The sheep don't become sick within that time. The lambs go to slaughter. The abomasum, which the worms live in, is then extracted out. It's one of the only parts that isn't used for as part of
Mm.
the food chain, and then we built the machine that extracts the parasites from the abomasum. So yeah,
Right.
it was very much a joined up thinking process between, you know, how do we get these little worms that are a millimeter in diameter and 5 mil long in their thousands in a clean solution out of a rather
Mm.
mucky abomasum.
And creating then a solution which obviously massively helps welfare, because it's probably not the most pleasant way to die for a sheep, is it?
For sure, yeah. I mean, it's a
Mm.
horrible parasite. It's a nasty blood sucker. They go anemic, and yeah, they don't
Mm.
look great. And so yeah, Barbavax. I mean, it's now really taken off. Obviously, there's been drenches and what have you that have been around for many years, but that's really just a chemical elastoplast solution. A vaccine
Yeah.
is so much better. It's largely prevalent in Australia, and it's also available in South Africa. I believe you can get it in the UK as well, but only white label through Merlin Vet, who imported it back into the UK. And I think some sheep farms around Devon and Cornwall that have wet, hot summers. Certainly, Barber's Pole is taking hold here as well.
In around. Okay, no, it's interesting, and of course, it's so much better if we can vaccinate rather than put chemicals into the sheep that then,
For sure.
obviously excretes that into the environment, and we don't know quite, well, we have an idea that that's not great for the flora and fauna around that can obviously then be affected, and so there's a sustainability element. So that's fantastic. But we are talking about numbnuts today.
Yep, the
So
next generation.
it would be great to see the contraption. This is the advantage. We're doing this as a video podcast. Those of you listening, at some point, if you want to, you can come onto the Webinar Vet site to see the actual contraption itself. So it's
So
you can
I'll
see
do
that.
my
Perhaps
best
if
if
you
you like.
explain it.
Yeah, I'll do my best to try and explain for those of you listening on the wireless. It's something like you've probably not really seen before. I've sometimes had it described as that if you've watched that film Men in Black, there's a little ray gun that they pick up. So it's really quite different to those traditional illustrator pliers that have been around for over 50 years, which really just look like a set of pliers. What NumNuts is a tool which accurately and consistently provides local anesthetic to a sheep when it is castrated or tail docked. And as all vets will know, having anesthetic put in exactly the right place, close to the nerves, is vitally important. If you're getting dental surgery and you were to put anesthetic in your left cheek and then drill on the right, I think you'd still have quite a few people jumping out the dentist chair. So the key to this was we knew from the research done at Edinburgh Uni that local anesthetics were a great way of combating the ischemic pain for rubber ring, which is at by far its highest magnitude within the first hour. The challenge, and this is where the product design challenge came in, was how do you consistently and safely allow this to be done in a farm environment by maybe non-trained vets. So vets obviously have very good understanding of the anatomy. They know where to put anesthetics, but it's impractical, even in the UK, for vets to turn up at every farm at lamb marking time and provide this. It would just be simply be too expensive. And it was that sort of commercial aspect which led to the impetus to create this device. So what we have is a tool with which we've actually flipped the ergonomics to try and give a better hand grip for expanding the ring. In Australia, they'll often be doing 1,000 to 2,000 lambs a day with this, so RSI was very important. And rather than having to expand it and twist your wrist whilst you're holding a 15 kilo of holding force, after you do 1,000, that soon starts to give you RSI in your wrists. So this uses the tennis racket grip, which is the strongest sort of grip in the human body. So ergonomics for the human was important. Once it's expanded, we move from a three-pronged tool, a four-pronged tool to ours, which is a three-pronged tool. And the three prongs are important because we needed to create that consistency. We needed a datum point, which would apply the needle each and every time in the same point. So behind this center pin here, the needle is held safely behind that, so preventing needle stick injury. And only at the point where I move my hand away from holding the scrotal sac or the tail, I move my left hand away to push the orange button, does that allow the needle to advance, inject the dose, retract, suck in the next dose, and off you go. And I guess what is key to this system is that we use the ring as an integral part of the procedure, if you like. The ring is acting like the jig or the clamp that is holding everything in place consistently so that the anesthetic is being placed just where we want it, between the two spermatic nerves, and creating that bolus and preventing the nerve conduction through to the brain.
Yeah, that's brilliant. You've used this obviously a lot in Australia, and we'll go over that in a minute. But have you had any problems? Because obviously you're using the same needle. How often do you need to replace the needle when you're performing this procedure? Is there sort of post injection
Yes.
infection
So
problems?
commonly asked question by vets, very little asked by farmers. So the needles we use are stainless steel, sort of they're not just typical single-use needles. They're stainless steel, and they're made to last for. We recommend changing them every two bottles, so every 150 injections or so. Now it's
Yeah,
that delicate balance between infection risk from needles and practicality of actually doing a better job. One
yeah,
of the nice things we discovered about local anesthetic, lignocaine in particular, is that it's actually an antimicrobial. So the lignocaine, bugs don't grow on it. And what you tend to find as the product's used is that you get a little bit of splashback, a little bit of the anesthetic actually ends up in that channel, which where the needle's hidden. And we think
yeah.
that's actually helping there and acting as
As an
a
antiseptic.
sort of sponge antiseptic to
Yeah.
clean it and keep it clean. Certainly now in Australia, we're up to 4 million lambs, and we haven't had any feedback to say that we've had problems with infection.
That's brilliant, Robin. I'm very impressive. 4 million. I think that they get some respite from what is a painful procedure is fantastic. How long do you think that the local anesthetic, works before it starts to wear off?
We know. I guess that's probably best answered in context with the magnitude of pain. So when you put a
Yeah,
rubber ring on, it's not painful instantaneously. You can, well, I often get people to put one on their finger, and generally it's totally fine for a couple of minutes. It takes about 2 minutes for the ischemia, the blood supply to be cut off, and then
mm,
from about two minutes to about 35-40 minutes, it is excruciatingly painful. It's a deep visceral pain, and it's the
yeah,
nerve endings that are supplying that appendage are signaling to the brain to say, I'm lacking oxygen here, I'm dying. And so
Mm.
it's akin to sort of striking your thumb with a hammer or stubbing your toe. What we see
Yeah.
in the lambs is a thrashing, a rolling, a very visual display of pain. So this is why we believe that local anesthetics are very appropriate here. Is obviously lignocaine, as we're using in Australia, generally takes a minute or so to kick in. If anyone's had dental treatment, it'll almost certainly have been with lignocaine.
Yeah.
The dentist will inject it. You'll wait a minute. He'll test the site once the numbness kicks in, and generally it works certainly for an hour. But a big part of this is also reducing nerve windup. So if you don't have the feeling of that pain during the
Yeah.
procedure, you don't have the
Yeah.
emotional attachment to it. And I guess, where we are really with sheep castration and tail docking at the moment, certainly in the UK, is it's back to dental surgery in the 1800s, where people knew they had to go and get a tooth extracted, but were so fearful of the process, the
Because
psychological
there was no
aspect of the
anesthetic.
process. It was
Yeah.
no anesthetic. Whereas these days, obviously, no one enjoys going to get a filling or a tooth extraction, but in reality, it's the high magnitude level of pain is completely taken care of with the anesthetics. Um,
Mm.
Thereafter, if the dentist will say, if you're feeling a bit of ache in your jaw or whatever, take an ibuprofen, which in the veterinary world would be probably meloxicam. And
Yeah.
But in reality, giving someone an ibuprofen and then doing surgery would not be appropriate. And so, although our system and tool puts the anesthetic in at the same time as the ring is being applied, it actually does, we believe, pretty good pain masking over the most severe part of the
Yeah.
process, which is the first hour.
That's really interesting and a good analogy. I will say that my dentist is female rather than male, and this last week she was giving me a few injections because I'm having my first ever crown put in. So that was quite an interesting experience. And actually, doing the impressions for the crown, you feel it, in your jaw because of the sort of force that they're putting on it. So it was quite a traumatic experience, even with the local. But without the local, I don't think I would have signed up for it. So it's a really good point.
The Webinar Vet has been serving the veterinary community with CPD for over a decade, but did you know we offer so much more than just that? Our sister company, Simply Vets, have veterinary jobs all in one place. We serve the full veterinary team, providing permanent and locum roles in practice, whilst also providing a simple and transparent solution to IR35 where needed. We also care about the environment. That's why we plant trees for every one of our practice members. To find out more, please visit simplyvets.com today.
So obviously, this machine being used for tails and for testicles, so you can use it for both. And you've actually done over 4 million lambs in Australia now.
Absolutely, yeah. So one of the key design challenges was that obviously rubber rings are used for both procedures, and a really difficult design challenge was getting the needle depth, the needle consistency right for both. We also knew that farmers wanted to do this process fast with little faff, so
Mm.
we had to optimize a dose that would work for both. So I think the difference between an engineer and a mathematician is that an engineer is happy with the answer that's 80% right, and that's what
Yeah,
we approached this. We
yeah,
we said I think the reason that this space hasn't had a huge amount of progress for 30 or 40 years was people were looking for a perfect answer, and with pain it's
yeah.
very difficult to provide no pain.
If you can
Our
reduce
approach
pain
was
by 80%, that's great.
our approach was if we could develop, we're not saying it is completely painless, but we're saying we made a massive improvement in that,
Mm.
and be able to do that to both tail docking and castration in a single dose, in a single shot, with one device. The key here was that it didn't add to the time that the procedure took.
Mm.
And I think I know we have you have listeners all over the world, but it is worth at this point pointing out the differences between lamb marking in the Southern Hemisphere, particularly New Zealand and Australia, versus the UK. So in New Zealand
Mm.
and Australia, nearly all lambs are marked between 4 and 8 weeks of age. They're generally born out in the paddocks in the fields. They're given 3 or 4 weeks to mother up, to build some mass, to get accustomed to the surroundings and sort of grow, should we say. And then at first muster, they're all brought in at say 4 weeks of age, and so by that point, obviously they're all born. They're not born one by one, as we would perhaps in barns in the UK. They're all brought in for muster, and they use a lamb marking cradle, which is a sort of whirly-gig type device that you can load 4 lambs in at a time. One person's loading, the next person's adding the tag, the ear tag. They're doing vaccination, and they're doing all the processes all in one go at the same time. So in this case, vaccinating, tagging, and providing rings for and tail docking castration, and and in a typical commercial farm in the Southern Hemisphere, you'll be doing anything from 500 to 2,000 lambs a day in that process. So a farmer will bring his neighbors in, you'll get some labor in for a day or two, and they'll work their way through. Obviously, in the Northern Hemisphere, and this is largely driven by the legislation of the 7-day rule for use of rubber ring, most people castration tail dock within, well, they legally have to do it in England between 1 day and 7 days of birth. That rule is probably one of the biggest challenges that we face as a company, and maybe we can come to that later. But just
Mm.
pointing out those differences is important with the context of our device.
So it's a product that obviously is doing very well in Australia, and I can see that if it helps to reduce pain, 80%, then why would we not do it? But obviously, I know what you've said there, and from previous chats, there are challenges bringing this into the UK because obviously of the time also that we use the rings, and I believe also because of the local anaesthetic that you're using. So do you want to explain to us where you're up to within the UK process and where you see the future, going to? Is this a product that we're likely to see in the UK anytime soon?
Well, I very much hope so. It's a sort of a frustrating conversation of largely design engineered and most of the core science done here in the UK. This is, I say, the core science done in the 90s at the Royal Dick Vet at Edinburgh Uni, showing that anaesthetic is very useful for rubber pain, and then also our connection with Morden Institute, who helped a lot in the early animal trials. Unfortunately, the impetus came from a Farm Animal Welfare Council report in 2008, and they did a big literature review of this whole space, and said in that review, research should urgently be directed towards providing practical means of local anaesthetic for castration and tail docking of lambs. It was that report which got us going. It really set us on this pathway to creating this. And for me, I guess over the last decade of my life, I've based everything I've done on that. Frustratingly, though, when we went to search for funding in the UK, it was like looking for water in the desert. There was nobody here that was really prepared to pick up on this recommendation and actually do anything about it. That plus the connection through Barbavax, my dad's product, was what led me to Australia. And interestingly, I found a completely different attitude over there. The broad shoulders of the Australian lamb wool industry embraced what we had and funded a lot of the core development of Numnuts. To give you some context on that, it's cost about $6 million to get the product from off the drawing board and to the point where it was commercially available. About 50% of that was funded by the Australian Farming Network, and 50% by myself and my design company. So that's the kind of money it takes to get something like this off the ground. We first showed Numnuts at a sort of prototype level at the Royal Highland Show to the UK chief veterinary officers, the RSPCA and what have you, who gave us lots of pats on the back and said, "Well done, carry on." But unfortunately, none of that led to any significant changes. And as a result, in Australia, lignocaine is the anaesthetic of choice. Australia, New Zealand, and the US, most other Western countries outside Europe use lignocaine. As some maybe older vets will know, in the UK, lignocaine used to be used in the UK up until 2000, but it was then withdrawn off the scheduling by the VMD, I think part as an EU directive. I describe it being withdrawn a little bit like a classic car trying to meet a modern day safety test. I think we all know it's a very safe drug. It's injected into humans in your jaws every single day. The problem is that it's off patent, and the EU laws decided that it needed to prove itself safe. And with it being off patent and a very low cost drug, no pharmaceutical company was willing to put the funds in to do the MRLs, the minimum residue studies, the ESIs, and what have you. So the UK veterinary industry lost lignocaine in about 2000. And that's ultimately what's caused us a lot of grief, because we only have Procaine available here, which I believe is a less good anesthetic. The Procaine is actually supplied by two European companies, which post-Brexit are not that interested in supplying to the UK. And I guess our challenge as a device, we're a hybrid company. We're a half a pharmaceutical and half a device company. But in order to provide the solution, we need both supply to come together, both anesthetic and, we've obviously got the tools, and we've got the tools ready to sell here in the UK. But without access to the anesthetic and in a commercially viable way, we can't do that. The VMD with the regulations wanted us to prove that Procaine had sufficient efficacy, and it took us. We've been trying to apply for funding to get that underway for the last 4 years, and that's been difficult. We got a little bit of funding last year, but not enough to do a dose efficacy response. So where we sit currently in the UK is we have outstanding efficacy with tail docking. We know we've got the best UK tail docking device in the world. Our problem is trying to get the dose amount that works well for castration is proving difficult. And it's all interconnected with this 7-day rule. We know that many hill farmers, both in England, Wales, and Scotland, somewhat ignore this 7-day rule. It's a piece of legislation that came in the 1950s, when back then people were trying to do the right thing. They looked at a lamb that was castrated and tail docked at maybe say 48 hours old. How much did it wriggle? And then they compared that with one that was possibly done at 4 weeks. How much did it wriggle? And obviously the one that done at 48 hours wriggled less. What we now understand 40 years later is that part of the reason it doesn't wriggle as much is because it runs out of energy. They've only been live for 2 days, and they can't physically wriggle that much. So the pain experienced is no different depending on the age of the animal. The unfortunate situation that the UK has found itself in is that it's legislated for a procedure. It's legislated in a way that stymies innovation, should we say. The Australians, the New Zealanders have allowed us to carry on.
Are getting it. So really, we're at a bit of an impasse in the UK. Having said that, you've shown obviously with your Australian successes, what a great product it is. So I hope there's maybe people listening to the podcast today who have some influence and can start thinking about how we could use this tool. Because as you say, at the moment, animals are still being castrated with rings and having their tails docked, and they're not really getting any pain relief for it. So if we have a machine that will reduce pain by 50%, 60%, 80%, whatever the number is, that has to be better than just applying the ring with, as you say, a pair of pliers. So
if I could just, I mean, there's some interesting policy decisions as well to be made at a BVA level. The general acceptance, I think, here is refine, replace, remove. I think is so in a procedure like this, that's the high level doctrine, and I completely agree with that. That in a perfect world we would not castrate and tail dock lambs. It has to be assessed against DAGs, the effect of the other way. So it's that's the reason we do it. We do it for good reasons. Unfortunately, the BVA policy again, it seems to be want to leapfrog one of those three steps. So at the moment, farmers do it, no pain relief. They as far as I can gather, the current suggestion at the BVA is to go straight from what we have to not doing it at all. So just leave the tails on, manage the DAGs, the fly strike problem in a different way. And with castration, we obviously don't castrate because we don't want interbreeding in flocks. So that the suggestion is that farmers should try and keep males and females separate in fields. Now I would say that's a fantastic utopian way of looking at it. What we've tried to create here is a transitional product that can help between where we are today to where we need to get to probably in a decade's time. And I think that's the interesting debate that needs to be had in the UK is there a space for this right now, or could we at least have some clarity that you want to go directly to removing the procedure altogether? And if that is the case, that's fine. We'll go and continue to market Numnuts in other countries which believe that pain relief is and continuing the procedure is the way. But yeah, sorry.
No, it's a good point. Yeah, Robin, thanks so much for that. Obviously, good luck with the continuing development of the product. I think it's a really interesting story, and I wish you all the best for it. And obviously, it does seem as if, as you say, similarly to oil, we can't suddenly just get rid of oil from our sustainability story. So there is transition times. And I think this, as you quite rightly said, is perhaps a transitional product if we are going to move away from rubber rings. But if we're not going to move away from them, then I think it's a really great gadget, and wish you all the best with it.
Thanks, Anthony, and thanks very much for listening.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. This has been another episode of VETchat. Take care and see you on a podcast soon. Bye-bye.